Hey everybody. So I am going to be doing another, excuse me, another short episode with Chapter 7. This is my sister's wedding weekend. She's getting married on Saturday, so I do not expect to be having a live read on Sunday. I will either do one Saturday uh, before the wedding, since the wedding is in the evening, or I will do it later on Monday. But I wanted to get Chapter 7 done today, and I had to help out with some of the setup for the wedding first, so this is coming in a little late, but you're still getting one. So shorter chapter again, but we'll get one done and keep plugging away. So Chapter 7. Diago wasted no time in heading for the great library. As soon as he had been shown to his room, he deposited the items he did not need and went to find Udo. The traveler was leaning against a wall on the second floor just below where most of the others were staying. He had pulled out a long, thin pipe and was smoking it, using a small matchstick provided by one of the servants. Diaga walked up to him, Neep following close behind. Udo took a deep pull of his pipe and nodded in greeting. Diaga Cursair, what can I do for you? The wizard leaned against the balcony and absent-mindedly stroked Neep's fur. I would like to go to the great library, now if possible. Udo smiled. I expected you would not hesitate. Do you need me to show you the way, or was there some other service I might perform? I need to speak to the person with the most extensive knowledge of the library texts. Ah, Udo tapped the side of his pipe. That is not so easy to accomplish. The library is vast, and there are many collections of various types. I will need a bit more guidance to determine who among the caretakers of the records can assist you. I see. Diaga thought for a moment. It would be someone with a knowledge of the gods and any interactions they might have had with mortals, especially if they had somehow come to Teftinir. Udo's eyes widened and his face grew serious. What exactly is it you're looking for? Truthfully, I don't know. Udo studied him for a while, then dumped the contents of his pipe out into a brass tin and left it on the balcony edge. All right, I think I know who to introduce you to, but it will be interesting to see what you make of her. If you want to go now, I will take you. Neat brushed up against Diaga, and he turned to look at her as though he had forgotten she was with him. She looked at him and purred softly. Diaga thought of the fire cats and the hand gestures they had seen in the oasis. He turned back to Udo, who was now ready to leave, and said, Also, could you perhaps direct Neep to a place where she could learn the hand language of her kind? Neep looked up at Diaga sharply, and her fur bristled. She was not inclined to go anywhere without him, especially in this massive city, and she was not entirely sure she wanted to learn from this alien form of communication. Caliandra came walking down the steps of the third floor then, towards them, and Diaga smiled at her. Perhaps Caliandra can take you, Neep. It would be good for you two to spend some time together. At that, Neep let out a feline hiss and glared all around her, taking a step back. Udo laughed and, unafraid, came towards her and scratched her ears. She stared at him in shock as he said, Now, there's no need to get angry. I'm sure you're a bit nervous, but this is a far better way to spend your time than in some dusty library. Caliandra also came forward and, hands clasped in front of her, spoke quietly. Neep, I would be very grateful if you would come with me. Firecat, her moment of anger now past, relaxed and looked once more at Diaga. Without another word, she swept past them and down the stairs in the entryway of the building. Udo considered the others and shrugged. It seems she is willing to go. We should hurry before she changes her mind. What about Joven? Caliandra asked. He's not going to go with us while Trem is undergoing Athor's treatments. We best leave him be for now. On the streets of Ulinar, now in the early afternoon, there were many people milling about Athor's home in hushed circles of veiled conversation. As Udo led them outside, they dispersed, but only a short distance. Udo walked boldly down the street and turned toward the square where the great library was. The others hurried to follow him, quickening their pace and trying to ignore the stares and murmurs all around. Caliandra finally caught Udo by the sleeve and said, They do not need to watch us like we are about to set the city on fire at any moment. The traveler laughed lightly. Many of them are staring only because they've not seen many people with your fair white skin before. Caliandra started, a bit in surprise, then laughed. Diaga smiled as well, and soon they were in the square where Farah Ein Tevanir had confronted them before. Neep was still moving furtively about the others, unwilling to give up the position of vanguard to the small group. She kept her eyes moving sharply across those about them, waiting for any threat to emerge. Udo halted near the center of the square and turned to face them. Diaga, you can continue on with me. Caliandra and Neep, if you pass to the right of the library and continue on for 3 intersections, you will come to a large open amphitheater just to your right. There are always fire cats milling about, and often they are with companions from the city. It may take time, but you'll find someone willing to teach Neep their art. Caliandra thanked him and looked at Neep, who was glaring at each of them in turn. The priestess took a step towards her, and the fire cat pulled away slightly, but did not move out of her reach. Caliandra extended her hand in the direction Udo had told them to go. Do you want to come with me, Neep? The fire cat seemed taken aback at the invitation, expecting an order instead, and then she purred softly and walked past Caliandra, padding away quietly and quickly. The priestess smiled at Udo and Diaga, and then hurried to catch up. Udo put his arm around the wizard. All right, young master of the arcane, let us go meet Keeper Ulhenra. Caliandra had to move quite fast to reach Neep as the group parted ways. Realizing she had sped off a bit too quickly, Neep stopped at the edge of the library and waited for her. Once she was close enough, Neep continued to move at a slower pace. Caliandra had thought she would need to keep them on the correct path, but it seemed Neep understood the directions Udo had given them. Caliandra saw her pause at each intersection and check both left and right, look to be sure the priestess was still with her, and then proceed onward. At the third intersection she stopped and sat on her hindquarters, staring to the right. Caliandra came up next to her and looked in the direction she was facing. Udo had left out the tranquil beauty of the amphitheater, which was full of marvelously green plant life about its edges and had wonderfully polished stone benches wrapping about a raised slab of pale marble. Above the benches, a great overhang of thinner, finer stone draped in vines provided shade for the audience. There were a number of performers, Malarians on the raised platform enacting some sort of play in their native tongue. However, while Caliandra was initially drawn to them, she soon saw what it was that had stopped Neep's progress. All about the amphitheater there were crowds of fire cats and people of the city. Some of the men and women were dressed in simple robes, but most were wearing the elaborate finery of the nobles of Yulinar. It seemed that the Firecats and the Malarians were moving about in pairs. The Firecats would stop and make gestures with their hand-like front paws, just as the two had observed in the oasis. People seemed to also be using hand motions to talk to the Firecats and one another. It explained why the place was so much quieter than other parts of the city they had walked past. Most of the communication, save a few scattered and hushed conversations, was being done through hands. Neep's fur was raised slightly as she watched the multitude of her own kind mingled with so many humans, and all of them engaged in some form of communication she did not understand, but recognized as far more complex than her own exchanges with Diago or his companions. She felt excited and unspeakably nervous at the same time, unsure of what to do next. Instinctively, Caliandra reached out and stroked her neck slowly, the soft touch helping to calm Neep slightly. The Firecat looked up at the priestess and snorted, shaking herself and shifting on her paws. Caliandra nodded in understanding. "It's frightening, I know. But what if you could tell us what you are really thinking all the time? What if you could tell Diaga exactly what's on your mind, not just have him reason it out from knowing you so long?" Neep looked at Caliandra, almost as if seeing her for the first time. She studied the priestess, gauging the honesty in her words, and then looked back at the crowd milling about before them. With a shake of her body and a dramatic stretch, Neep stood on her hind legs and walked forward, Caliandra close behind. It was a frustrating process. At first, many of the Firecats attempted to talk to Neep using gestures, but as Caliandra tried to explain that Neep did not understand them and wished to learn, they were either unable to comprehend the priestess or dismissive of them both. Several of the Malarians that Caliandra tried to approach were of no use either, as they did not understand the common tongue or did not care to listen. After over an hour of rejection and confusion, Neep was ready to give up. She had been invigorated by Caliandra's vision of what this could mean for her, but the stark reality that Neep was an outsider here, even among the other Firecats, was destroying her perseverance. Caliandra was feeling exasperated too, not with Neep, but with the aloof and dismissive people in the amphitheater. Dejected, Neep finally curled up against the side of the stone seats where Caliandra joined her. The Firecat meowed forlornly and tucked her head into her body. Caliandra tried desperately to think of something, anything, to say to her that would repair the emotional damage and ease her own guilt, but she felt similarly defeated. While considering what she should do next, Caliandra noticed a small group of Firecats and Malarians perhaps 50 feet away, whispering to one another and pointing in their direction. Fearing they had now become the subject of mockery, she was about to rouse Neep when one of the men in the group came walking over. He bowed his head respectfully to her and said, "Excuse me, miss, but is this the one asking to learn the hand speech?" Neep's head came up, eyes narrowed, as she was expecting to be laughed at or studied like some circus sideshow. The Malarian, wearing a simple long tunic with most of his black chest exposed, crouched down on the balls of his feet and smiled at her. "Are my countrymen proving inhospitable?" Neep's expression did not change, but she slunk out from behind Caliandra's legs, where she had been hiding, and sat on her hindquarters, regarding the man before her. He had very short, dark hair, dyed in a few places in reds and blues, and a number of shiny bracelets and earrings denoted he had some wealth. Neep was still on guard. Her time as a traveling entertainer had made her used to being an exhibit of sorts for the wealthy and powerful, something to be stared at and whispered about. The man gave her a disarming smile. "Do you want to learn hand speech, my dear?" Caliandra looked at Neep, who was somewhat hidden behind her. "My friend does not know any, and she is being very brave and trying to learn." "Yes, she is. Come with me. I can introduce you to some others who can help." The man led them to a house not far from the amphitheater. It was a small building nestled among the larger, more elaborate structures about it. The exterior had a number of strange symbols and writing on it that Caliandra did not recognize, and a plaque outside, written in Malarian, suggested the place was of some significance, which might explain why it had survived the growth of prestigiously larger homes and shops around it. Caliandra paused to study the plaque, and the kindly man with the colorful hair obliged by translating. This was the home of the last lost elves of Hadenmark who came to Yulinar on a mission of intellectual exchange. The last died some centuries ago, and the home has remained preserved ever since. Did the rest return home? No, the lost elves do not allow those who leave their islands to ever go back. The small contingent became part of our city, and they stayed until each passed from this life. Caliandra considered the odd sadness of the story before Neep brushed past her and into the home. The priestess followed, and inside they found a quiet, small interior room with 4 other occupants. 3 were fire cats, one of whom seemed far older than the others, with white fur about his face and long whiskers. The other in the room was a Malarian woman who hugged Neep and Caliandra's guide in greeting. "This is my daughter. She's been one of the more active teachers of hand speech to those who are inexperienced. Your friend can learn with these 2 young ones and their aged teacher. We are here every day after the hottest hour has passed." He stepped aside to allow Neep to see the elder fire cat clearly. "I think the first word one should always learn is friend." The wizened teacher sat, as did his pupils, on his back legs with his chest held upright. Neep imitated the others, sitting across from the older fire cat. The teacher extended one paw, his finger-like toes curled as though he was gently gripping something in front of him, then bent his arm at the elbow, pulling the extended paw back to his chest. Caliandra watched in fascination as Neep imitated the motion. The man who had brought them there smiled as he watched. Think of it as putting your hand on a person's shoulder and pulling them close to you. It's a good place to begin, and there is much more to learn. Caliandra repeated the gesture herself, the eyes of the fire cat teacher shifting to her, and he nodded in approval. Kneeling next to Neep, Caliandra decided she could forgo her trip to Endos Temple for the day and settled in to learn hand speech. Udo paused in the walk to the great library to purchase a few flat, seasoned pieces of bread from a street vendor before he led Diaga to the doors. Ulhenra forgets to eat sometimes. Many of the keepers become too fixated on books and dusty scrolls. The rest of us, as fellow sages, have a duty to make sure they care for themselves. Diaga waited while Udo spoke to the 2 men outside, dressed in thin shirts and baggy breeches that were cinched above the calf. They soon were pushing bodily against the wide doors, which swung inward slowly with a deep rumble. Diaga walked into the lobby of the massive building, with Udo saying, "Keeper Athor seems to be more personable." Udo nodded in agreement. "She must be, in order to be as revered as among the sages as she is. Most keepers simply do not care to have influence over the day-to-day decisions of Yulinar. The keepers are consulted about matters that require particular, often incredibly obscure knowledge. That means when we need them, they are usually working and must be sought out. Some don't ever leave the library. Is Ulhenra one of those sorts? She keeps a home in the city, but I've never found her there." They came to a large, long stone desk that rose to Diaga's chest, though it was slightly shorter than on the taller Udo. Behind there were 3 figures in gray robes, all writing or reading something in front of them. Udo cleared his throat politely, and the one nearest sighed and looked up. Without hesitation, he waved Udo through when he saw him. Diaga expected there to be some question as to who he was and what he was doing there, but Udo clearly was so well known to the keepers that they simply allowed him to bring his companion along. The 2 went to the left of the reception desk and turned, walking beneath an arched hallway on the right side, of which Diaga could see great masses of books and other writings on shelves and in piles, a swarm of keepers sifting through them. He would have stopped and observed out of curiosity, but Udo ushered him along. "They are sorting through the uncatalogued records. Some will be moved to the appropriate parts of the library, others discarded if they prove redundant or lack usefulness." "You mean they destroy them?" Diaga was horrified. Udo laughed. "No, young mage. They are discarded, tossed in the lowest reaches of the library in an unfinished cavern of stone. When we need to delve deeper to accommodate our collection, the artisans of Yulinar will shape it into a neatly arranged hold for our records and carve out a new home for the discarded works. That usually happens every 1,000 years or so, but less often now that we have contact with most of the known and lost civilizations of the world." They descended a great number of steps in a rectangular stairwell, unadorned with wall hangings or even torches. Diaga was about to ask how they would see once they got past the windows letting in just a patch of sunlight, when the rails along the stairs began to glow as they walked by them. They continued, the path of light marking their progress, until Diaga was certain they were at least 5 stories down. Then Udo stopped at a simple wooden door, one of the hundreds along the steps Diaga had seen, and, to his eyes, indistinguishable from the rest. The traveler turned the knob and held it open for his young companion to step forward first. It was not what Diaga had expected at all. Instead of the large open room where the cataloging was being done, this was more like a study, crammed from floor to ceiling with precariously stacked volumes of books and piles of paper. There was no one within that he could see, but light was coming faintly from a far corner. Udo led him through a maze of towering leather-bound texts, and they at last came upon a small desk at which sat a gray-robed figure, quill in hand, scratching out notes on a large piece of yellowed paper, her other hand holding open a small book. Udo walked right up to the desk and placed the food he had purchased just above the book, the keeper not picking her head up until she finished her writing. Then she placed the quill carefully in the book, lest she lose her page, and looked up. "Oh, Traveler Udo, you are back." "Yes, Ulhenra. I wanted you to meet someone." The woman turned to look at Diaga. She was young, not as young as he, but likely no more than 30 years. Her dark hair was a mess of tangles and shoots that stuck out under her hood. Her eyes constantly roved the room, but took him in deeply as well. A northerner, probably from the Napoleon Empire. A refugee from the war, then? No, robes. Not normal attire for a Napoleon. She furrowed her brow. A student of Osmandius. Probably a refugee, but before the invasion. Arcane powers are less appreciated there even than they are here. Diaga smiled. My name is Diaga Corsair, and yes, I'm a wizard and I hail from what was once the Napoleon Empire. Then you're looking for spellbooks. Elhenra turned to Udo in exasperation. I'm not in charge of that collection. Why are you interrupting my work for this? He doesn't want spellbooks, Udo pointed at the food. When is the last time you ate? Elhenra began counting off on her fingers before saying, it would have been 32.5 hours ago. Udo sighed and put his hand firmly on the book Elhenra had been studying. Eat first, then we can talk. The keeper seemed incredibly annoyed, but she did as Udo said. Diaga managed to find a stool amid all the clutter, and miraculously it was not covered in papers or books. He sat on it, and having left his staff at Athor's home so as not to insult the nonviolent sensitivities of his hosts, he interlocked his fingers and waited for Elhenra to finish. She ate rapidly, either out of hunger or a desire to be done with something she clearly regarded as an unnecessary nuisance. And soon Udo relinquished his hold on the book and leaned against the wall. Clearly still agitated, Elhenra glanced at her work a few times while speaking with Diaga. As I said, young mage, I do not work in the cataloging of spellbooks, nor have I much knowledge of your arcane art. You might do better to go a number of levels up and ask a keeper there. Udo is right, though. That's not what I'm after. Well, be that as it may, I can't imagine you looking for something in my realm of expertise. No one ever seems to be. Udo comes down just to ask the occasional question about a place he's visited. And to make sure you eat, the traveler added. Elhenra glared at him and continued, So I'm not sure I can help you. Diaga reached into his pouch and pulled out a piece of paper. I am looking for information related to these names, something to do with weapons. Weapons? Elhenra appeared even more exasperated, but she took the note without looking at it and said, I don't dabble in weapons. How could any of this be related to... The silence was sudden and dramatic as she looked at the paper in her hand. Her fingers shook slightly as she swallowed visibly. Setting the paper down on her desk, not taking her eyes off of it, she asked, Why are you looking for such things? Diaga shrugged. I don't really know, and the search is not mine exactly. I'm traveling with a man who's also from Nepal and wishes to liberate his home from the invaders. He seemed to believe these names were connected to an item or items made by the gods themselves. Elhenra said nothing for a while. Then she picked the paper up once more, never looking away from what was written on it, and said quietly, Yes, there's something to what you say, but there's also much more, and I need to be certain you understand enough before I agree to assist you. Udo left his spot leaning against the wall and clapped his hands. Then I believe I was correct in bringing him here after all, wasn't I? Elhenra did not answer him. Instead, she reached under her desk and pulled out a strange contraption of brass and crystal with a leather strap, which she put round her head. The device rested on her brow, and Diaga could see it contained a number of magnifying lenses of various sizes, carefully constructed so that the user could adjust the strength of magnification by slotting different circlets over one another. Elhenra stood and swept past them both towards the back of the room. Udo patted Diaga on his shoulder. I'll leave you to it. Come back to Athor's whenever you like. The traveler was gone quickly. Elhenra clearly not noticing at all. She pulled up several books from piles and off of rickety, overcrowded shelves, paying no attention to the mess it made. Diaga came to assist her, and she spoke to him without ever turning to see if he were listening, or even near enough to hear. Adal and Adwel ibn Hazrad Einafir are names few know, and for good reason. They studied arts which are best left unexamined, but perhaps those which now we must at least try to comprehend. Elhenra pulled a hefty book from the shelf and, shoving several others aside, set it on a partially broken chair. Adjusting her bizarre glasses, she began hunting for a page, finally resting on one that had some of the most beautiful illumination art Diaga had ever seen. She placed a finger on a word in the first line. Few are aware of it, but the Immortellum may be the most important event in all of history. The Immortellum. Diaga rubbed the back of his head. I've heard it mentioned before, but the details seem very limited. Yes, and contradictory. In short, it was a war between the gods themselves. A war? How's that possible? Aren't the gods immortals? I mean, there's the other name. That's the other name most used to refer to them. Elhenra lifted the device from where it had been over her eyes and looked at Diaga. Immortal just means they won't get old or sick, but no, it does not mean they cannot die. They're very hard to kill, certainly, but gods can be killed by one another in certain circumstances. What kinds of circumstances? Elhenra sighed. That is unclear. Much of my work has been trying to uncover the laws which govern the immortals, as well as the relationship between their world, ours, dreams, and the beyond. Diaga was, for one of the few times in his life, genuinely at a loss. The beyond. Elhenra looked at him for a while, her eyes boring into his as though she was trying to see his thoughts. Then she spun suddenly and pulled a number of books from the shelf, tossing them at him over her shoulder. Yes, a place people know less about than even the Immortellum. Well, it may not be a place exactly. It's all very unclear. She stopped, for which Diaga was grateful, as he was now trying to balance 6 sizable books in his arms. Turning, she said very seriously, Those names you gave me are 2 of the foremost scholars on the beyond, and it's almost impossible to tell what they really know, what they are speculating, and how much madness crept into both. Suffice to say, the beyond is a very, very dangerous place. Diaga whispered a simple cantrip, and the books hovered from his hands and arranged themselves neatly behind him. He looked at O'Henra, who was staring back expectantly, and then he shrugged. Well, I need to find out about these weapons, and I promised to look into it. Can we do that without causing some sort of disaster, or is that simply not possible? O'Henra snorted. I said before these are not spellbooks. You won't set off some sort of arcane power or explosion just by reading them, but that's not the problem. She walked close to Diaga, almost nose to nose, and thrust her finger in his face. No one thinks about how harmful knowledge can really be. If you delve too far into something you should not, eventually you become consumed by it. Keepers know this well. We allow ourselves to be consumed, but we also have a clear goal in mind, understanding, not application. You, on the other hand, you may learn more than is safe and dare too much, so before we start, you need to tell me what you're willing to take that chance. Diaga stared down her finger into the dancing light of O'Henra's eyes, his neck craned back slightly to prevent her ink-stained appendage from touching his face. You've got me curious now, and I did make a promise. Let's see what we can find. O'Henra broke into a huge smile and spun away from him, immediately tossing more volumes and papers bound by string over her shoulder at him. Wonderful. Then we need to sift through things and make a few categories to begin. Those I gave you and these are records that refer to Adal and Adwel. Then we'll need specific accounts of the priests of a few particular gods during the Immortellum, and lastly, the few writings I have that were penned by the two scholars themselves. Diago was able to keep up with the flying books, using his magic to quickly catch and sort them in piles near him while he physically shoved other unnecessary works and furniture aside. The minutes began to tick by, with no sign of O'Henra slowing in her efforts, and the stacks of accounts for the two to pore over grew swiftly. So that's it for Chapter 7. I will pick up with Chapter 8 sometime either this weekend or on Monday. Thanks for listening. You can always send questions, comments to @Legacy Chronicle on Twitter or through Twitch and YouTube. And hopefully I'll have the YouTube videos updated and uploaded by Sunday.